Welcome to episode 43 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. Of all of the situations that have been brought to our attention that involve law enforcement and citizens, there's an aspect that really haunts me. It's about the person who makes the initial phone call to bring law enforcement to the scene. We've already covered the woman in Central Park who weaponized her white supremacy by calling law enforcement using incendiary language to threaten a non-threatening man of color. That, we can agree, is pure evil. But there's another type of call that is made, one where the intent is to get help. These calls are made by people who see something in their environment that triggers fear for them. It is also made by families who have a member who is having a mental health crisis. Too often these calls have been met with lethal force and someone ends up dead, which was never the intent of the person who made the call. It haunts me to think of how you carry that for the rest of your life, knowing that the phone call you made resulted in someone being murdered. The guilt that must induce is hard to imagine. You wanted a good outcome, but the fact that you called law enforcement resulted in someone dying. At that point, your original intent flies out the window, and you now have become a participant in something horrendous. It has come to the point where we need to do the mental gymnastics before dialing 911 to see if we can live with someone dying as a possible outcome. There's a new shortcut for people with iPhones. It's called Police. It allows you to say, "Hey Siri, I'm getting pulled over." When you do that, the shortcut pauses your music, turns down the brightness of your phone, and turns on the Do Not Disturb feature. It sends a text message to a contact you designated when you set up the shortcut, so someone will know what is happening. It starts recording the interaction and sends that video to your contact. While we can marvel at the ways that technology can solve real-life issues, what we really should be marveling at is that this particular shortcut is needed. The people who pull you over work for you. They are paid by you. The fact that our confidence in our interactions with these employees of ours has degraded to the point that we have to protect ourselves in this manner is one of the reasons that we need to reimagine law enforcement. If we can't feel confident that there will be a safe resolution when calling for help or when being pulled over, we need to reimagine law enforcement. If people cannot be in a park having a violin vigil in the name of Elijah McClain, who was killed by a chokehold arrest and the administration of a lethal dose of ketamine, without law enforcement showing up in riot gear and pepper spraying the people in attendance, we need to reimagine law enforcement. Law enforcement's motto is to protect and to serve. We have drifted from that intention into a very dark place. We need to reimagine a system where we can get the support we need in all of life's different challenges without having to fear for our lives or the lives of others. We are all here in this one school working through our own curriculum. We need to be able to do our work without being fearful of other students who mean us harm. Our job is to be each other's mirrors, to be the guardrails for one another so we continue to move in a forward direction. The guardrails have come off of this institution, and it is our duty to fix that. We do it not only for us. We do it for law enforcement. We need to care enough about everyone that we don't want to sit by while they are dropping back down to the lowest levels of spiritual awareness, while being encouraged and allowed to do so by the institution they have created. We have constructed artificial worlds where there is no accountability. That is not loving. That is not supportable. And none of us are safe or move forward until we fix it. A necessary part of growing to a higher level is the acknowledgement of choices made that are at odds with the mindset of being at a higher level. There is no movement without that part of the process. That is where we are, as a nation, in this moment. We have collectively made all the mistakes, and we must now look at the toxic outcomes from those mistakes. It was never part of the plan that we not make mistakes. Mistakes are an integral part of the learning process. We were also designed with all sorts of frailties that created justifications for the mistakes. At the time we are making mistakes, they make total sense to us until they don't. We are human. We are often wrong. It is baked into the system. But also baked into the system is the desire to do better and be better. That is our saving grace. We have all sorts of frailties, but we also have virtues that become even stronger as we move to higher levels of awareness. These virtues factor into our decision-making more and more as we acquire them. As you turn the radio dial from the frequency that honors your frailties, you move it in the direction of the frequency that honors your virtues. At the lowest levels, you may be faced with a challenge, and your immediate response might be the desire to kill the person who is challenging you, because that is the only way you can see the challenge ending. As you move up the levels, you have a greater capacity to assess what the challenge is, why the person is challenging you, and an increased ability to see what their perspective is and how the challenge can actually make you a better person. You have an increased ability to empathize with the person who is challenging you, which changes the tenor and tone of the challenge altogether. When you are operating at the lower levels of spiritual awareness, you think that your choices are your identity. This leads you to defend your choices in a manner that suggests that to choose differently would be the death of you. Your identity is wrapped up not only in what you have chosen to do, but what your ancestors chose to do. You have to see it all as right, or you would no longer be able to survive and look yourself in the mirror. When you are operating at a higher level, you recognize that your choices are nothing more than part of the process of growth. They are not who you are. They are simply what you did at a given point. At higher levels, you know that you are a work in progress and that your identity is that of a soul who is choosing to grow and get better. And you know that getting better means making better choices than you did in the past. You are responsible enough to own what you have chosen and free enough to choose better and clean up the messes your wrong choices produced. You are also free enough to recognize that your ancestors made some terrible choices that were motivated by fear of what they did not understand and could not yet grasp. They did what made sense to them until it didn't. The choices they made and the mindsets that they held were the underpinnings of many of the institutions we still have in place, here in a time when we no longer see things the same way, now that we know better. You are free enough to clean up the messes they baked into the system that still exist in this school. That is not simply a right of yours. It is your responsibility. The new world we create cannot be built on a foundation that has so many obvious cracks. It will not be enough to add on to a building whose structure is poisoned and morally unsupportable. We tend to equate our love for our ancestors with a need to preserve everything they did. That's not going to work. That doesn't mean that we can no longer love them or hold in esteem the parts of them that provided us with love and safety and connection. But our love and esteem for them cannot blind us to the fallout from their choices. I think of all the states in this nation that engaged in slavery. What is heinous to us now made some sort of sense to them at the levels that they were working from. They were able to convince themselves that the slaves were subhuman, that they were not entitled to the basic rights and freedoms that were afforded white people. This justified to them the unpaid use of their labor, along with the meting out of abuse, rape, murder, and practices of selling and breeding the slaves as if they were common livestock. At their level of awareness, this all made sense. Then, after a war to preserve these practices, it made sense to the ancestors to block every avenue possible for the former slaves to achieve a life that was equal to theirs. When the former slaves used their talents to succeed anyway, they burned down their towns and killed them. At their level of understanding, this was all justifiable. The efforts of our white ancestors has given us a 400-year head start. We, in this generation, are still profiting from that head start. Our ancestors, in the name of religion and their devotion to our Creator, have made choices that damaged and decimated generations of the Creator's children, and used the Creator as cover to do so. Not only did the ancestors see people of color as subhuman, they taught their children and their grandchildren that this view was right and sanctioned by their Creator. And here's the kicker. It is necessary to see them as subhuman for one reason only. Because to let go of that belief and all the choices associated with it would require the self-reflection to see that they, all who benefited from dehumanizing others, were the ones who were behaving in a way that was decidedly subhuman. They were the monsters. It is easier to think that black people were wrong than it is to rethink the rightness of your white ancestors. We, as humans, are not the best at being able to look at our own choices with clear eyes. It becomes further complicated when we have to look at our ancestors with a clear eye. It is impossible to reconcile the loving memories you have of Grandpa's pipe and Grandma's pies with the indisputable fact that Grandpa and Grandma made monstrous choices in the way they treated others and the systems they put in place and feverishly supported to keep in place. The love we hold for the parts of people that benefited us, while turning a blind eye to the damage those same people did to others, is part of what has brought us to this point. No one wants to face a family history that is messy and painful, but we must do just that. And in doing so, we don't have to stop loving Grandpa and Grandma. We just need to acknowledge the damage they caused and clean up their messes. We need to do here on earth what they cannot do from where they are now. Our love for our ancestors must fuel our efforts to do things a better way. We function as the part of their story that moves forward into the light. Maybe your ancestors didn't own slaves. That doesn't let you off the hook. Your ancestors were a part of the practices that were designed to dehumanize others and keep them separate from the world in which white people were allowed to prosper and build generational wealth and the privilege that brings. Keeping people of color out of their neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces was enough to ensure that they couldn't be a part of the American dream that was being dangled in front of everyone. People are being asked to disassemble their identities to take in new information, new images, and potential solutions to problems they did not think were their own. But the state of the world is our problem to solve. The people who have been systematically marginalized for generations are not the people who are responsible for solving that problem. We are. The white people whose ancestors made the rules, and everyone since then who has just ignored the inequality because it was easier to look away, are the people who need to take the system apart and remake it in a form that is fair for all. That may seem overwhelming, but keep in mind that we know so much more now. We have so many more tools in our arsenal. We have more people who are working from the higher levels of spiritual awareness. We have everything we need to get the job done. We have the virtues, and we have the ability to connect with like-minded people all over the planet. This should make us unstoppable. The only thing that stands in the way of getting it done is unwillingness to really look at it all. It will make you wince, and it should. There are some horrific stories out there about man's inhumanity to man. There is a reason that history, as it has been taught from books written by and for white people, is whitewashed. There's much to be ashamed of in all that has happened up to this point. But that sick feeling in your gut when you learn about the massacre in Tulsa, or when you watch the footage and see the photos of white adults screaming at black children that are being integrated into the school systems, that needs to be converted into the fuel needed to set things right. We need to absorb every bit of the darkest sides of our history to understand where we need to go next. We need to sit and take it all in, imagining how we would feel if we had been treated that way. There are no shortcuts. We need to own the history so we can choose to create a new world, one where everyone is free to do the work they came here to do, free to contribute their greatest gifts, from which we will all benefit. We need to live in a way that makes our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren proud. We need to stand up for what is right and what is fair, and a world that is inclusive of all. That is the revolution. Thanks for listening to Rebirth Revolution. This world needs all the revolutionaries it can find. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Email rebirthrev rebirthrevolution@gmail.com or leave a comment on rebirthrevolution.com. Until next week, seek out sources of reading and viewing materials that will enlighten you. Soak up some sun, check in on those you love, and wear your mask. Remember, you are loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Be open, be humble, and stay safe.